Just to begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I speak from unceded Aboriginal land, always was, always will be. And I am on the land of the Cammeraygal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to the elders, past, present and emerging, and also to their wonderful history and stories in this part of the country on Cammeraygal land. And I'd also like to pay my respects to any Aboriginal people who may be with us tonight or who may watch this at some point. And welcome to all of you too. So tonight's topic is, again, you know, energy is something that I'm going to probably refer to every single week because it's a lens that I see things through. For me, it's a spiritual lens. And so I'm going to talk about an energy system that is becoming much more common in our social world. And it's referred to as the invisible wound. And the invisible wound is trauma. Trauma, for those of you who are not sure what trauma actually is, it is our response to a perceived threat. And for that threat to elicit a traumatic response, it needs to be life-threatening or be a significant warning of danger of some sort. That also may possibly involve a life-threatening situation. Now, regardless of whether the situation actually is life-threatening or not, or whether it is what we think it is, that doesn't matter, because my response is my response. And it may be the threat to somebody else's life, or it may involve someone else being terribly hurt, and or others, plural. And because we are human, hopefully, the way the soul is inside is that we have these things that are in our brain, and they're called mirror neurons. And mirror neurons develop very, very early in life. They develop in very early infancy. And mirror neurons are a very, very important part of us. Why? Because they are what allow us to connect with what is happening to somebody else. Because we imagine what it might be like what it would be like if that were happening to me. And you'll see babies, if they're in a room together and one starts crying, the others will, other babies will start crying, or if one baby throws up, the others will throw up. This is about, they're called their mirror neurons. And there's actually nothing wrong with that. In fact, when you understand child development, it's a really good sign, because it means that that baby is developing empathy and compassion. And both of these things are very, very important for us to develop in a deeply human and feeling manner, and that enables us to engage with other people and with other animals or environment or whatever. So our mirror neurons are important. When children don't develop empathy, and we can usually see it by about 4 months of age, it's not a good sign. And it can be a sign of autism in that child. So, but it's these mirror neurons that also are very active in eliciting a trauma response in us when we're watching something happen to somebody else, or people plural. And one of the particular symptoms of trauma is anxiety. And anxiety is said to be possibly, the most uncomfortable emotion that we experience. And so I'm going to talk about it. And the reason I'm going to talk about it is that we live in a changing world. We live in a world that is becoming much more violent, and that, within what used to be the safety of our lives, there's a lot more risk, I think, or a sense that things aren't as predictable and stable as, they once were. And so we don't know when we may be subjected or exposed to a situation that could be quite, in a sense, for us, quite traumatizing, quite traumatic. What I can say from experience is it actually doesn't take that much. And what this trauma response is, it's functions as a closed system, energy system inside of us. And I'm going to explain this. Internal spiritual function when we're in a closed system internally, we will have a repetitive pattern of feeling, thought, and action. Now, addiction falls into that category. Obsessive compulsive behaviour falls into that category. And trauma also definitely falls into that category. So healthy spiritual function is an open system, and a healthy system of any sort of system that is open is healthy. Our family unit is a social system. It's a basic social unit of society. And if our family system is closed, then it's going to be unhealthy and dysfunctional. If it's open, it's going to be a lot more healthy. And so in a sense, what I'm going to talk about tonight is the absolutely vital necessity of opening our energy systems. And we live in lots of closed systems. So everything begins with me as usual. If I try and open the cultural and familial and social systems around me, but I'm still closed inside, what will happen? Well, if I'm shut down, I won't be open to anything, and I won't be able to keep a system open. It simply won't work. So this is why I need to always look at myself. When I change myself, I can really change the bigger picture around me, because the healthiest start to that is that I'm not blocking energy myself internally, and therefore I'm not blocking it within a bigger system that I function in. And all of us function usually in lots of systems. So energy systems are either closed or open. There's no in between here. The door's open or the door's closed. This is across the board. Closed systems trap and block energy. And when energy can't move, of course, it stagnates. It causes us problems. Spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. And when the effect filters through to the physical level, it causes us a lot of discomfort. It may even cause a threat to life. And so working on just the physical level of the problem, often people go to their GP. It's first port of call when they feel distressed or unwell. But working only on the physical level actually will not get to the cause of the problem. We have to go deeper than that. I'm not saying we shouldn't work on the physical level, but if I don't deal with things on a deeper level, unblocking the stagnant toxic energy, the condition will deteriorate and become chronic. And so when we look at trauma, there is this perceived threat. It may be a very real threat. The moment something happens, such as what is happening currently in Ukraine, or up in northern New South Wales, in the Northern Rivers area where there is massive flooding, it's terribly traumatising for people. A friend of mine lives in Lismore, has a house in Lismore that he just bought, and he woke up during the night and his house had filled up with water. And he's got two young boys. He had to go and get them out of bed, get them out of the house, and get them to safety. I don't know the full story yet, but those kids, of course, are terribly traumatised, and I'm sure my friend is as well. So all of us have what I'm going to call a window of tolerance. And the window of tolerance refers to that space inside where I'm able to remain grounded and flexible, open and curious and present. And I'm able to, I'm going to use this term, emotionally self-regulate. So I'm in control of my emotions. I can manage my emotions. Now, that will vary from person to person, depending on all kinds of factors, particularly childhood factors. Now, if I'm going to attempt to share my screen and show you a diagram, okay? Okay, so you'll see that yellow line in the middle of the diagram, that yellow line, that basically shows a normal level of emotional variation in anyone. And so, it's not a straight line. It sort of goes like that, because during the day, something happens and it's annoying or it's irritating or it makes me sad or whatever, and then I recover, and then something nice happens and I feel a bit lighter. And so this is a normal sort of emotional line, and that, as we can see, that's right in the middle of the window of tolerance. And so that would represent your normal state of mood, with the normal kinds of little ups and downs that would happen during the day. Obviously, if something really critical happened, like your relationship was ended, or somebody close to you, a loved one died, or something massive happened, or you win the lottery, you win $20 million. Woo! So you'll go up into a very hyper state, possibly, if you win the lottery, and you could go down if something really, really critically awful happens. Like a bomb gets dropped on your home, or floodwaters come in, all these kinds of things that can happen. And so once we get out of the window of tolerance, where, if you like, we're out of our comfort zone. So if we go up into the red zone, the hyperarousal, that is going to be incredibly uncomfortable. That's where we're going to experience a lot of anxiety, fear or anger, feeling absolutely overwhelmed. I can't manage my emotions at all. I can't get back into my window of tolerance because I've been blasted out of it emotionally. And it's what is commonly known as the fight-flight syndrome. Because, if I'm walking down the street at night and someone appears in front of me with a knife, that will throw me into flight or fight. So I get this huge burst of adrenaline and cortisol flooding into my system. My heart rate increases, my blood pressure increases, and I've got all this energy because it's a life-preserving thing that's happening to me. It is there in all of us to preserve life. So we become hyper-vigilant, and so at that point, what also happens is that our brain has prepared us, our body has prepared us to escape, either escape the danger or turn around and fight for our life. And so we've got all these hormones rushing through our veins, in the bloodstream. And what's happening in the actual brain is that we're feeling so much that the emotional reaction to that, it shuts down our cognitive brain, our intellectual function. And so, we are no longer calm. We're in emergency mode. And so this is not a place in which we can make considered decisions. So we will act quite instinctively. And because we've been thrown very much back onto our brain stem and our limbic brain here. And, I've talked about how we have a third brain. Humans have a third brain. So much of that is just shut down. Our executive function is shut down. And so we do whatever it is we do. We turn around and fight, or we run, we escape, or we try and escape, whatever it is. And, I remember when I was a little kid, I was in kindergarten at school, and I lived in a sort of semi-rural area. The family lived in a semi-rural area. And on this occasion, we used to kind of walk through, we kids used to walk through paddocks to get to school as a shortcut. There'd be cows and horses and things. But on this particular occasion, I remember I was walking along the road to go home after school, and a little calf had gotten out from one of the paddocks. It had escaped. And for some reason, I had a little red raincoat on, like a little Red Riding Hood raincoat. And whether it was the colour or what, I don't know, but it just chased me up the road. And I was, talk about fight or flight, I was terrified of this little calf, because I was really, I was pretty tiny too. I remember running into the church, sobbing, so terrified. So we're very, very subject to that, as a kid. Things can really frighten us. And so then, we need safety so that we can rebalance ourselves. And sometimes, you might need a little bit of help from the outside to do that, like a little kid. That's when you run to mummy or daddy or somebody, and they help you to emotionally regulate. They reassure you. You say, oh, you'll be all right now. You're safe now, or give you a cuddle or whatever. And then you start to feel safe again, and, you come down. And so you feel back to normal. You will eventually soon feel back to normal, because all that hormone production will cease once that perceived danger goes away or is stopped. But another thing that can happen in trauma is after the hyperarousal, and this is can be very much with something that happens with what we call complex trauma. Which complex trauma is what happens when there's a number of traumatic incidents that keep happening. So it's not a one-off. And children, if things happen to kids, whatever it is, if it's something that's going on in the family, some form of abuse or neglect or whatever, or it's an external thing, it's much worse for a child if it is in the family. Hypoarousal, someone can go from hyperarousal into hypoarousal, where they will just shut down and become very withdrawn. They freeze, they're numb, they're passive, and they may feel a great deal of shame for whatever reason. And it's like they're stuck there. They can't really get themselves out. And it can be, a lot of work to get somebody out of hypoarousal when they go into it. We also call it, when someone's in hypoarousal too long, when they can't get out of it, then they will go into a state that we call dissociation, where they just totally cut off from their environment, whatever's happening around them, and that withdrawal is pathological. And this, when someone is repeatedly traumatized, they can become very dissociative as a result. Women in domestic violence situations, children in domestic violence situations. Dissociation is a coping mechanism when something is happening in the home environment that they cannot control. They can't stop it, they can't control it, then they will dissociate. They'll go into this hypoaroused state and then dissociate. Okay, here we are. And so this is sort of what trauma looks like. Trauma is a terrible experience. If it's more than a single episode we can recover from, and we know we're safe, and whatever it is, it's gone, it's not going to particularly bother us again. If it does bother us again, that single episode, it will be very easy to treat in psychologically. If a mother has a very difficult labour when she's giving birth, that can be very easy to treat. But if someone's had repeated traumas in their life, then that is going to be much more complex. The trauma is complex, and it's going to be much more complex to treat. And someone may have had to deal with trauma in their childhood, and then, that situation ends, and then they're safe again. And then at a time later in life, they may again be exposed to some kind of trauma, which may be environmental. It It may be a flood or a bushfire or a whatever. And so if they're still carrying unresolved childhood trauma anyway, then they're going to have a more intense response to that trauma, that adult trauma, that new trauma. And so this affects us in many, many ways. You know, there's a physical response because we're energy. I mean, trauma is an energetic dysregulation. We say emotional dysregulation, but it's an energetic dysregulation. So, you know, whatever our normal vibrational frequency is, because we're energy, if we're hyperaroused, that frequency will alter. And if we're hypoaroused and dissociative, then it will alter again. And either way, it's really uncomfortable. Particularly the hyperarousal, I might say. You know, people who are walking around with trauma and who they frequently do not know that this is their situation, but they will feel terrible and not understand why. And look, the fact is it can happen to anyone. And we can be traumatised and not know it. Not know it at all. We can be anxious. We can be terribly stressed and not know it. But, you know, too much stress without good regular breaks can start playing havoc with our internal energy system, and which can result in, you know, depression and illness and so on. And so when someone has been quite severely traumatised, they will get this what we call post-traumatic stress disorder response, which can involve these dissociative states, flashbacks. They'll see flashbacks in their mind of the traumatic event. They'll feel very distressed and they won't be able to think things through. It'll be very hard for them to function using their cognitive faculties the way we normally do when we're calm and peaceful and not distressed. So what that can, it can be very disruptive to our life, to our work, to our relationships. When we're traumatised, usually the effects will come out in every aspect of our lives. And when we're in that window of tolerance, energetically, we could think of that as being in a state of flow, because when energy is in balance, it's moving, it's flowing, you know, we're flowing very nicely. And when we're with other people, the energy between us and them will flow very nicely and very harmoniously, because we feel safe and protected and comfortable and secure and in balance. But of course, if we go into hyperarousal, then that's not going to be the case. We will go into a much more rigid state. And if we go down into hypoarousal, then that's going to be quite a chaotic state internally, where we kind of shut down, can't cope. And so when organisation and harmony and synchronisation are lacking internally, when we're pushed out of our flow state, then we will feel internally erratic and chaotic and very disconnected from the self. And I know from my own experience having huge exposure to traumatic situations. You know, for 4 years I worked in our immigration detention centres, and I was exposed on a daily basis to a massive amount of psychological abuse being perpetrated by our own government here on innocent people who were who had been forced to flee war and danger, and might have lost their families, whole families, seen members of their loved ones killed, lots of other people killed, and who had tried to flee that situation and got on a boat and come to Australia, quite legal. It's quite legal to come to Australia by boat and seek asylum, and then get locked up for years and years and years, and go through this extraordinary amount of mental torture. And so I worked in those environments for 4 years, and I came out of it, I hate to say, but very traumatised myself. And as someone who clinically I specialise in dealing with trauma and complex trauma, I found my own trauma very difficult to deal with. It is a horrible, horrible experience. And I have to say, after experiencing it myself, I always had great empathy for my clients, but I just had so much more. So when we have harmony, we have integrity of connection of energy. And when we have chaos, there is disintegrity or a lack of connected flow. Chaos and rigidity oppose integration. And this is how closed systems work. And we are exposed to a lot of closed systems. Our political system is closed. Many of our social systems are closed. Our religious systems are closed. We can come from family systems that are closed, or other kinds of systems, might be an education system or whatever, that is also closed. And rigidity is used to control or organise the chaotic energy. But integration can never, ever occur in a closed system. And so this is why we say, when you're dealing with a closed system, there is no integrity. There can't be, by the very nature. So our health system is a closed system. Our social welfare system is a closed system. And problem with closed systems, and this is probably another whole talk in itself, closed systems. Now, if we look at the closed systems around us, our religious system, our political system, education, health, mental health, our social welfare system, etc. These are closed systems. Now, what's happening? They're collapsing. They're collapsing because closed systems have to collapse. They implode, and that is their nature. And so they will eventually collapse. You know, we've been watching our religious systems collapse for a long time. And, you know, these other systems around us also that are closed are becoming so dysfunctional and collapsing and imploding all over the place. So do we have any questions? Angelica, do you have a question?
Not directly as such, but I'm just sort of absorbing what you're saying, and yeah, so thank you. I'll continue listening.
Look, you may not ever have experienced trauma. I hope you haven't, but it would be most unusual. Yeah. Because the majority of people in our society have been exposed to trauma at some point, some more than others. And it doesn't mean that you won't in the future.
I'll just make a brief comment. Yes, trauma is very alive in my life currently, and it's just been very helpful listening to what you have to say. So thank you.
Well, that's good. That's good. You know, if we are plunged into a natural disaster, into a bushfire, a flood, or you know, some other sort of natural disaster, then I think having a bit of knowledge about trauma is actually a very useful thing. Because trauma, when we're traumatized, our perspective on what is happening is distorted. That is the nature of trauma. And, you know, trauma can affect so much of our lives, can make us worry more, make us more anxious. Kids can have separation anxiety with their parents. We can have friendship problems, phobias and fears. We can develop body image problems. There are just so many ways in which trauma will manifest. Yes, hi.
Hi, Judy.
Hi.
Hi, I was interested to, when you're ready, to hear about inherited trauma, like, you know, parents that have been through the war and then next generation, and then sort of compensating.
Great question. Great question. Is that Judy?
Yes, we've met a while ago.
Yes, Judy Cater. That's right,
yeah.
Judy. Yeah. Thank you for asking that question. What a good question that is. What we see, you know, I've worked as a therapist for about 32 years, and what we do see, what in my community we see working with people, when I first started practicing back in 90, I was seeing a lot of people who were children of European migrants whose parents had been chased around Europe by Hitler. They were refugees. They'd been through terrible, terrible deprivation and all kinds of horrendous experiences. And their parents had been offered an opportunity to come to Australia. We desperately needed people here after the Second World War. So they came out here from lots and lots of different countries in Europe. And as long as they were white, mind you, because we didn't take people of colour at that time. We had the White Australia policy. But a lot of Europeans and Brits and various people came out here, and they had been through, many of them, been through a lot of deprivation and trauma. And they came here and they married and had families, and they started small businesses, or they went out and started agriculture. They got property out in the country. They started farms and got into agriculture because they had those skills. You know, we had a lot of skilled labour come out here, and they worked. They were hard workers. And so they had this massive work ethic, and a lot of the fear that they were carrying made them just put it all, you know, build a life for themselves and their kids, and get their kids hopefully to university so that the kids could have a better life than them, because a lot of them weren't educated. So they had to work hard physically and, you know, run their own businesses, which, as you know, when you run your own business, you know, you could be working 20 hours a day. And so they came here, they had families, they got married, they had families, and their children, they passed on their trauma to their children. And back in the early 90s and then right along from there, I and my colleagues were treating the children of those people who'd come out here.
Yep.
Who had come out here from Europe and other countries following World War II. Their parents were carrying a lot of trauma. It hadn't even been named then. It wasn't identified. There was this term shell shock, but that was really only for soldiers who'd seen action. And so trauma wasn't understood. It really wasn't understood. And yet the children of these people were traumatised by their parents, by virtue of their parents carrying all this trauma. And so their parents, you know, weren't going to come to therapy, but the children would, because the families were so dysfunctional as a result. Very dysfunctional. And, you know, I treated so many people from from diverse cultural backgrounds, as did my colleagues, and, you know, community services and so on, social services. We were treating these people for a very long time. And, you know, that demographic has shifted now to newer arrivals. You know, and so trauma is passed on, and the research shows it takes 3 generations to breed it out. And so when you get a whole lot of people who are made refugees and they have to flee their country, they have to escape, they have to go somewhere else to be safe and peaceful, if they indeed can get somewhere like that, if they can get in somewhere. We know the the terrible situation refugees are in today of being displaced, you know, zillions of them are just displaced persons living in tents in terrible conditions in awful places. And to be able to help someone, they have to be safe. They have to feel safe. They have to feel in control of their situation and their environment. So one of the issues for us working in our immigration detention centres was that we couldn't really treat trauma. We had very traumatised client group there, but we couldn't really treat them because I'll come to you, Angelica, because they were in a situation that was re-traumatising them every single day of their life. And, you know, if a child is acting out in their family and there is a traumatic situation happening in the family, you won't be able to treat that kid while they're in the family. And this is how family therapy started. It started way back, I think, around about the 50s and 60s. And it was psychiatrists were treating schizophrenic children. Young children were presenting with symptoms of schizophrenia, young children. And so they would put them into a psychiatric hospital so they could observe them. And when the children were put into the psychiatric hospital, all their symptoms would go and they'd be quite normal. And so, but when they were put back into their family, they developed all these psychiatric symptoms again. And so this is actually how family therapy began, that the child was a symptom bearer of whatever was happening in the family, which was pretty traumatic for the kid and pretty dysfunctional and abusive. You know, maybe the parents were abusing each other or whatever, or fighting all the time, or playing games, but whatever was happening, the child was expressing that pain and that dysfunction and that suffering. And this is the basis of family therapy, you know, that the children all express some aspect of what's going on in the family and will take up roles. Angelica, you were going to ask a question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It sort of just popped up before, but I suppose relevant to what you've just discussed too, and it was when you described how our perception is distorted if we've had trauma. And I was just actually wondering, I have a way of sort of dealing with it, but I wanted to hear what you would suggest. And interesting, just hearing what you said about the children in these traumatic situations. It's like, yeah, if we don't feel safe, it's like how would they ever get to deal with their distorted perceptions if they're constantly in survival mode? Sorry, that was right. My cat just bit me. My cat just bit me.
Are you traumatized?
A little. She's trying to get some attention. Oh my goodness.
You know, fantastic question. It's not possible.
Yeah.
You know, if an infant or a child or anyone is in, you know, an adult, if we're in survival mode all the time, how can we function?
Yeah.
We can't. We can't function normally. We're just surviving. And, you know, if we can do that for a time, but if forced to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it, if it's a very prolonged situation, then the damage, oh my God.
Yeah.
Very, very difficult. And that's why, you know, when the people who have sought refuge here in Australia, sought asylum, have been locked up for 8 or 10 years up on Manus or wherever, you know, and then like a couple of days ago, five or 8 of them or something were for absolutely no reason were pulled out of detention and released into the community.
Oh.
They had no idea that was going to happen. They didn't know why it happened. It just happened. Well, what state do you think they're going to be in?
Yeah.
Can they go and get a job? No way. You know, they get so damaged. And I used to watch it happen with the refugees. They arrive in Australia. Most of them come by plane, incidentally. Now they all come by plane. But they've always, most of them, come by plane. So they'd arrive, you know, they'd manage to get through the whole scenario at the airport, which would be pretty awful. They'd end up, you know, in a detention centre, and they'd settle in, they'd feel safe. And often they would say to me, I'd say, how are you sleeping? And they'd say, really well. I have never felt safe before in my life.
Wow.
And here, you know, those cyclone wire fences and that whole scenario, actually, they felt safe. They had a roof over their head. They had 3 meals a day. The government gave them $50 a week to spend on, you know, biscuits or lollies or tobacco or whatever they wanted to spend it on. They had a room with a clean, you know, nice clean sheets and a warm bed. There were no bombs dropping. There was nothing awful imminently going to happen to them. And so those first few weeks they would just have so much relief and, I love the Australian government and I love Australians and I love Australia and this is a wonderful country. This is fabulous. And, you know, they'd been through such dreadful conditions that even in Villawood, they thought they were in a 5-star hotel.
Wow.
Things, yes. And then as time went on and they weren't released, they'd be all excited. I'm going to start a new life. I'm going to go and get a job. I'm going to make money. I'm going to save money, bringing my family out here. And, you know, I can make life better for my loved ones and my mum and dad and my wife, my kids, and so on. They'd be all excited. And then as the weeks went by and they didn't get out, they didn't get a visa, so they couldn't use that energy and that natural excitement about a new life to go and put that energy and that effort into creating that new life, they would start to implode because immigration didn't want to talk to them, didn't want to see them. They were going, when I was in the system for some of the time, the policy was go slow, so they wouldn't process them. Wow. I mean, that was cruel. That was so cruel. And so you just watch them implode into this really terribly depressed state. And then they're given no information, everything's uncertain, there's no certainty anywhere in their life. And their family is waiting, you know, because they've used every last cent and borrowed to the hilt to get him on a boat with a people smuggler, or on a plane with a people smuggler or whatever. And, you know, he's wanting to get money to pay that debt back, because often that debt comes with a lot of threat. If you don't pay that debt back, you know, we're going to kill one of your kids or something like that. We're going to make life really hard for your family. And so they just go into, you know, and they've arrived here with a whole lot of trauma. We can't treat that trauma because they're in a situation that is making them very traumatized. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, basically there's no foundation for them to even begin from. So yeah.
No. And until a person is free and unencumbered and has personal agencies, you know, when you take someone's personal agency away, when you make all their decisions for them, when they have no agency in their own life, there is no better way to destroy a human being than to do that. And this is what happens to women in domestic violence situations. You know, when people are prisoners of war, they're being tortured and held captive and psychologically and physically and mentally tortured. They have no agency in their life.
Yeah.
And this is how, you know, these techniques are used to destroy people at their core level of being. And it works. It's very successful. But it's very hard once that person is liberated from that situation. It's become so complex over time, and they've developed coping mechanisms that really are not healthy.
Yeah.
But they have enabled them to survive. And, you know, it's just very, very difficult. So,
yeah. I can understand in the that survival aspect of trauma, and just sort of a part of what I feel like is helping me. And you just can't even begin to imagine that. Yeah, you can't do anything unless you feel reasonably safe. You know, like. And that's something I've carried my whole life, of feeling of being in survival mode. So I understand where you're coming from with the information, and just kind of, it's quite perplexing to think that there's not even sort of a certain amount of anything for those people that can't begin to heal. But yeah.
So Judy, was your question answered satisfactorily? I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Judy. The description that you gave was like to the T of both of my parents who went through World War II and met in Sydney after their individual traumatic experience, and then you know, it's been put me on the path. But you know, and I like that diagram you showed today. You know, like it's always trying to return back to the center. Oh, I'm here, come back. Oh, I'm here, come back. And that's my, like, you know, that's what I have to do pretty full time to function in the world. And but I have accepted it. And, you know, because I've got lots of self-soothing and return to the center. And, you know, and I must admit, like in hindsight, I've come a long way, but you sort of carry it, you know, that's just.
Yeah. I hear you. Yes. Yes, that we've got lots of self-soothing techniques and mindfulness and, you know, tapping and all of those things, and getting plenty of exercise, And there are some very good therapies around too, you know, that can be very helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know, I hear you.
Yeah.
You're always dealing with it.
Yeah.
And this is where meditation is also really helpful.
Yes, absolutely. And then, you know, it's like, you know, navigating relationships is a different kind of experience to, you know, being in like a secure family, sort of creating that type of relationship. You just, relationships are a different type of learning and experience than something sort of what, you know, traditionally looks like.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, I've gone way over time, but we're going to finish with some meditation nonetheless.
Thank you.
So I invite you to just sit, and we'll go into that safe space. If you just find that safe place inside that only you can go to. Place inside.
Sorry, Judy.
Yes.
Judy, sorry, I just want to apologize. I got the time wrong.
Yes, finding that very safe place inside where that only you know about, and where you can invite your great protector to be there with you. And so withdrawing into that place, that safe place. And if you don't already have a safe place, then just create one for yourself. It may be something you knew as a child, your grandmother's kitchen, where she pulled nice hot biscuits or cakes out to give you, that has happy memories, but somewhere just personal to you. So into your safe place where you can breathe deeply and completely relax and let go. Let go of the world around you and the people around you, and just be still and silent inside. So just finding that place and sinking into it like a very comfortable armchair, feeling safe and protected. And releasing any emotions that you don't need to have in there with you right now. If you want to pick them up when you come out, you can do that, but you have a choice. Going into your quiet, peaceful space. Just feeling the calmness inside. And the stillness and the flow and allowing and inviting the great protector to come into your space with you. And fill you with light and power and strength. Knowing you can come to this place whenever you want or need, when no one else can find you or invade. You feel the warmth and power of the great protector surround you and fill you. Knowing that you can take this protection with you, that wherever you are, this protection will be with you. Just connect. Yourself through your intellect and heart to God, and you will always be safe. You will always be loved. And cared for, no matter what your situation. Shanti. So thanks very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
And have a wonderful week, wonderful, safe week.
Thanks, Judy.
Great to be
Thank you.
with you.
Thank you, Judy.
Good night.